Here's a brief summary of what we are told in the book of Genesis. In the biblical book of Genesis, Cain and Abel are the first two sons of Adam and Eve. Cain, the firstborn, was a farmer, and his brother Abel was a shepherd. The brothers made sacrifices to God, but God favored Abel's sacrifice instead of Cain's. Cain then murdered Abel out of jealousy, whereupon God punished Cain by condemning him to a life of wandering. Cain then dwelt in the land of Nod, where he built a city and fathered the line of descendants, beginning with
We have some life lessons that we can learn from Cain and Abel's story. The first one is, there are consequences to our actions. After Cain killed Abel, he was cursed and banished from the ground, and he was condemned to a life of wandering. Another one is, don't envy others, for being jealous with the achievements of other people will just bring fleeting gratification, but won't actually satisfy you. In the first part of the Noah story, God requested Noah to build an ark because a great flood will be coming that will happen all over the earth. But because Noah has been so faithful, loyal, and true to God, God decided to spare him from being killed in the flood, unlike all the other human beings on the earth that were sinful, evil, and greedy. Thus, God requested Noah and his family to build an ark to save their own lives and all the animals on earth, as they were innocent and didn't deserve to die, while God will take care of the rest. The story of Abraham and Isaac involves one of the most agonizing tests, a trial both men pass because of their total faith in God. God instructs Abraham to take Isaac, the heir to God's promise, and sacrifice him. Abraham obeys, binding Isaac to the altar, but God intervenes and provides a ram to offer instead. After, God reinforces his covenant with Abraham.
The moral lesson of the story Jacob and Esau. One of the moral lesson of the story is, do not be greedy or deceitful. Being greedy can drive you to do unlawful and immoral activities for your own selfish benefits. Also, it can ruin your relationship to other people. And it happened to Jacob and Esau. Jacob tricks his brother to get the birthright. So because of that, Esau was so angry and upset that he promised if they will meet again, he will kill Jacob for acquiring the birthright and blessing of his father. After that, Jacob left the town because he's scared of his brother. So in life, we must be contented and thankful of what we have. The moral lesson of the story, Joseph the Dreamer. The lesson I learned from Joseph is trust God. When you are in the midst of a difficult state in your life, you're having a feeling that God has forgotten about you, do not turn your back on God, because it is the time that you will hold more tightly to Him. Just surrender all your worries to Him and trust Him. He will never let you down, and He got our back as always.
Moses. Moses was placed in a basket on a river by his mother in an attempt to save him from the Egyptians. Then, he got adopted by the Pharaoh and his wife when they found him in a basket. He killed an Egyptian and ran from the law. He encountered a burning bush and was given a mission by God. After talking to God, Moses traveled to Egypt, confronted the Pharaoh, and was rejected. Moses gave the Egyptians 10 plagues. After the Passover, the Pharaoh allowed the Hebrews to leave but decided to go after Moses. So Moses parted the Red Sea and the Hebrews crossed while the Pharaoh and his army drowned. So the story of Moses teaches us to have faith in God. It takes a lot of faith to go to the Pharaoh 10 times, to take the Israelites to the deserts for 40 years, and to simply do what God commanded. Joshua. God appointed Joshua to succeed Moses as leader of the Israelites, along with giving him a blessing of invincibility during his lifetime. Joshua led the destruction of Jericho, then moved on to Ai, a small neighboring city to the west. However, they were defeated with 36 Israelite deaths. The defeat was attributed to Achan taking an accursed thing from Jericho, and was followed by Achan and his family and animals being stoned to death to restore God's favor. Joshua then went to defeat Ai. Joshua asked Yahweh to cause the sun and moon to stand still, so that he could finish the battle in daylight. God also fought for the Israelites in this battle, for he hurled huge hailstones from the sky, which killed more Canaanites than those which Israelites slaughtered. From there on, Joshua was able to lead the Israelites to several victories, securing much of the land of Canaan. So the book of Joshua teaches us to be patient, because Joshua spent 20 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness, and then 50 in the promised land. God used the first 60 years of Joshua's life as a slave for the Egyptians and an assistant to Moses, to prepare him to lead God's people into the promised land.
The book of Ruth demonstrates God's grace toward people. In fact, the meaning of the name Ruth is grace. In the story, Ruth received blessings from God that she did not merit. And being a Moabite woman, she received God's blessings despite her status as a Gentile woman. By following her heart and doing what she knew was right, Ruth went from being a foreigner to being someone who was respected, blessed, and honored. When you follow your heart and do the right thing, your leadership potential increases. Ruth teaches us that human beings naturally find love and family connections wherever they are, irrespective of ethnicity and faith of the people they fall in love with.
The kings of Israel.
King Saul. Saul is the first king of the kingdom of Israel and Judah. His reign, traditionally placed in the late 11th century BCE, led a shift from a tribal culture to statehood. King David. David is described in the Old Testament as the second king of United King of Israel and Judah after Saul. In the biblical narrative, David was a shepherd who earns recognition first as a musician and later by defeating the champion Goliath.
King Solomon. According to the Old Testament, Solomon was a rich and a clever king of Israel who succeeded his father, King David. In the book of Kings remind us that we must serve God only. We must not serve false god. We must listen to God's word and not do evil deeds. If we do, God might send someone to warn us to listen to the advice of godly people.
The Judges of Israel. Before Israel had a king, it had a series of tribal leaders called judges. God used these men and women to save the Israelites from their enemies and lead them back to Him.
Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. The book of Judges tells us that Yahweh's sovereignty and the importance of being loyal to Him and His laws above all other gods' sovereigns. Indeed, the authority of the judges comes not through prominent dynasties, nor through elections or appointments, but rather through the Spirit of God.
Paschal Mystery Summary in the Moral Lesson. The events of Christ's death and resurrection and their significance for use, which we can only truly understand when our hearts are enabled to do so by God's grace. For us who believe, the gospel is indeed the power of God, and Jesus' death is the most wonderful, powerful, and important event in history.